Alright, welcome to part 3 of the SketchUp introduction. Now, you'll see that I kind of started to mess around with this model file a little bit just to create some more interesting spatial conditions. You can mess around with for 10-15 minutes to get into something like that. A little bit more complicated, there's some more interesting spatial interrelations. Right, so what I really want to show here are a couple of things. One is in the previous video we showed you basically how the idea of the group works, right? And there's another sort of category of these sort of group objects called the components. And I want to kind of show you the difference between the group and the component, and so you can kind of understand when you want to use one and not the other. So this is the previous group of stair sort of steps or treads that we had created in the previous video. And so I'm just going to use the move tool to copy one to the side, like that, just as a comparison. Right now, these guys I'm actually going to explode, right click and explode, which basically removes them from the group. All right, so it's not a group anymore. These are all individual, and instead of, and I'm going to start deleting them down to basically the last one, the original first element. Right, selecting them all, I'm going to make a component, and when you right click and make component, it gives you this dialog box, and let's call it treads, for example. Alright, type, actually don't worry about that, create. Okay, so this is now a component. It's actually on the wrong layer, the armature layer, so I'll just select it and use this to move it to the stairs layer. Okay. Alright, and now this is a component, and I can still do the same thing, same sort of idea that we did earlier, move and then control to basically copy it. Oops. Same way we did earlier. I'm not going to do as many because this is sort of, you get the point. Okay, now let's look at this. This is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different components, which I can still actually select and make a group, for example. So components and groups can actually kind of be nested inside each other like this, okay? But the main difference is, so let's say I go to this group, I double click on it to edit it, and let's say I push and pull to make these sort of bond treads. First few steps a little longer, right? And you'll see that these are things that I can basically edit individually, right? So they can all, they can all be different. Okay. Exit. If I go to these, and this is the group. Double click once to get into the group editing, then double click again to get into the component editing, right? So you'll see the sort of the layers of gray, right? We're sort of going down levels into levels deep, sort of like Inception, the movie. But if you see me highlight this, you'll see actually all of those get highlighted as well. And when I modify one, all the others get modified as well. Right, so this is the main difference between the groups and the components, is that the components are kind of like an instance logic where when you start modifying one, all the others start to get modified as well. And so in cases where you might want to actually keep things the same across a certain level of things, using components is actually the best way of doing it. So when you update something, everything else in the file gets updated. Alright, so that's the big difference between groups and components. Groups can kind of help you organize things or make things that are multiple elements. You can group them together to make it more manageable. Components are for these things that you can actually eventually insert. And I'll actually show you the other sort of big use of components. Well, we I'm just going to move this somewhere. So if you go to view toolbars and pull in the sort of toolbars dialog box, you'll find one that's called the warehouse. So the warehouse panel here, you can get models, share models. There's an extension warehouse. You don't have to worry about that yet. But the interesting thing for us is the get models. And if you click on it, it'll give you this. And you actually will see, and you have to be connected obviously to the internet to see this, but you'll actually see, for example, this. A lot of people have actually uploaded their models into onto this website, right? It used to be called the Google SketchUp Warehouse. I guess now it's just called the 3D Warehouse. And it has a lot of pre-built models, right? Some of crazy things. So let's see. Let's find a chair. So you'll actually find sometimes manufacturers of furniture in particular, or fittings, kitchen fittings, things like that, have provided their 3D models of their products, actually, because they want the architect to use it and eventually perhaps possibly sell it to the client, right? And so for visualization purposes, sometimes this is great. And so, for example, you can download that, and you'll get a asking you to whether or not you want to load this directly. And in this case, I just say yes. And it'll download it. You'll pop. And then actually, and this works if you have your scale correct, right? You kind of need to get your scale correct. The insert point might not always be what you're thinking of. So let's just click somewhere, and there's a chair. And let's move it. Probably snapping to this. Trying to snap it to this sort of level. Whoops. Obviously not working. Okay, yeah, that one worked. And just sort of place it in here, rotate it a little bit. No, not in that direction. Let's kind of make the placement look a little bit more organic. Yeah, so there you have a chair occupying the space, right? So these are components that are, furniture that you can download or populate. There's other stuff, and for example, one of the more common ones is people. Search that, right, and you'll get a lot of scalies, basically, right? A whole army, 3D people. Sometimes there's 2D people, 3D people. You can sort of pick and choose. Funky people for use in visuals. Let's see. For example, let's just find 2D people. Right, and generally, I think for the most part, you don't want the people to pop out too much in your sort of models, right? They're just there to serve as scale reference. And so, you'll find stuff like this maybe, and you can kind of click in and look at it, how big it is, the file size, and these are pretty small, right? So let's download that. And oh, now I have a flash mob. Okay. And then for the most part, these are also, so these are sort of ghosty people. You can double click in them to pull them out, right? Or move them individually, or if you wanted to, you select it, right click, explode, and you get all these things, these people individually. So you can actually really easily sort of move them into the right places in your model. Or let's say, sort of move them over here. Yeah. Right, so then you have a guy there to serve as scale reference, right? So you'll see that, you know, these sort of more realistic sizes or colors, materials, unless your model is also a very, you know, colored material, model with materials applied, you know, they'll pop out. So for the most part, you probably just want to stick with something like that, right? And just, you know, move a couple into your spaces to get a sense for, you know, how they're occupied. You'll notice that for the most part, I'm just roughly clicking on the bottom when I'm moving, and then trying to snap them to, you know, one of the layers first, or the sort of Z height levels first, and then just like move them into place. These particular ones are sort of 2D people that will always face you, right? So they'll always be turning to face you. And so you don't really have to worry about their rotation. If you were using 3D people, then you might. And this guy is sort of going to be stuck in the corner. Oops. So this guy will be stuck in the corner where nobody else can get to. All right. So that kind of gives you a notion or an idea of the scale and size of your construct, and kind of gets it occupied. And I'll just sort of delete all these others. All right. So that's a sort of, you know, pretty cool way of using basically pre-built components, and these are all components. You can edit components. Now there is a option here that you'll see, for example, this set of components that are all linked together. I can actually right click on it and say make unique, which will basically free it from being linked to all the others. So in this case, if I go down and try to edit it, you'll see that while it was linked to all the others earlier, let's see, now it's not. Right, so that's kind of just like a quick workaround, just in case, like, okay, you know, you have this one component that you just really need to change, right? But otherwise, all the others will be, you know, linked together. All right. So one of the things you'll notice is that because we inserted stuff earlier, the Eames chair in particular actually inserted a lot of layers with it, and we just deleted it out, so we don't need it anymore. But the layers that came with it, when you insert stuff like that, will show up, will still be here. And so one quick way is to kind of go to this button on the upper right and Purge. And usually what Purge does is that it will just sort of delete whatever is not really used anymore. So, you know, that's a sort of quick management sort of thing. Otherwise, sometimes what I do is I'll, you know, close the armature, close the stair layer, and so just kind of try to figure out what's on where. And so there's a sort of, you know, mishmash of things going on here. So let's select this, select that, you know, and actually, you know, we should just make a people layer for it and move them all to the people layer. Right, so they will disappear when you turn it off. Now I use this a lot basically to figure out, okay, you know, this is how I'm really organizing my file. And so once that's done, you can, you know, sometimes just try to figure out which of these you really don't need, and it will tell you sometimes whether it's empty or not. Do you want to delete the contents, etc., etc. So it's a good idea to kind of just check and say, well, if I'm deleting this layer, is anything disappearing? If not, then, you know, sometimes it's linked stuff, sometimes it's stuff that's, okay, you know, there's parts of it that are tied to some of the the components that you're inserting, right? So sometimes it might not be what you really want to do. Yep. So, you know, sometimes I try to just like go through and clean things out if it's like sort of really clear that okay, there are some layers that I'm really not using. So yes, but be careful, like for example in that case that sort of fill just disappeared, so I'm just gonna undo that. And yeah, now the main thing is that a lot of the components are just sort of come in this way, with things distributed between all their different things, and what you'll eventually end up having to do is actually just go in and select them all and move their geometry to the layers that make sense. And so stuff like that. Oops, no. This woman has, stuff that's, so I'm triple clicking and then just moving them into my people layer, going out. And then you can sort of double check and see if it's still doing it or not, right? So in that case, it'll just be sort of aware that once you start working with a lot of the components that, the way their layers are organized are probably not the same as yours. And so you might, have trouble here and there, just like trying to keep things neat and tidy. All right, so the next thing I want to get to here is actually the paint bucket tool. And the paint bucket tool is actually what we use to apply materials in SketchUp. And if you click on it here, then you'll give you this sort of materials palette, I guess. And let's see, let's try to make it a little bigger to make it easier to see. Okay, and so you can actually scroll through. There's a lot of different sort of categories for it. I'm just gonna use, let's see, just gonna use some colors for now. Colors named, yeah, colors. Okay. So there's a lot of colors here you can choose from. You can actually eventually make your own if you want to, going to the edit panel. Let's just pick, let's say, this dark gray. Okay, and then using that, you can actually just click on surfaces. Actually, that's a little bit too dark. Yeah, we can actually just click on some surface, on the surface that you wish to basically paint over, and do that. So okay, maybe that's one color, and then let's go down. Not blue, not purple. Let's use something like, yeah, all right, so that, and you'll see that it basically kind of colors in all your faces the way you had it set up. Right, that's really just simple, easy to understand, and you can color over it something if that's what you're trying to do, but it's really pretty self-explanatory, and you just kind of have to go through and decide which faces are colored. There's going to be a lot of faces actually when you sort of go through this, but on the other hand, once you've colored something in, if you start kind of building something from it, it'll actually, let's see, take on the properties of the original color. So in this case, now since that part was already colored in the red, then it will basically stick with the red. Right. So depending on what sort of stage or level of development you are, you can pre-color or color things, basically paint things at the very last moment. It's just you'll have to decide what's the best sort of strategy for what you're trying to do. Yeah. Okay, so these are solid fills. The other sort of thing is probably for textures or fills that have a scale to them, for example. And actually, let's just do a wood, because wood is usually the best. Okay, so this, let's pick one of these. Alright, this sort of light floor color, okay? And let's say, for example, I want to apply it there. And one of the things that comes with, you know, applying a texture is that the size, scaling, and rotation of it. And this is actually, in the end, it's actually pretty easy to manipulate. So if you have, let's say I apply the wood texture to this face, what I can do is simply right click on it, go to the texture, and position. And it gives you this interface where you can actually just drag it around, right? So in certain cases, if you needed to kind of align, let's say for tile or wood grouting in a certain direction, this makes it a lot easier. So you can drag this to, let's say, that corner, and you'll see that it tries to basically kind of snap to geometries. This is the other one that you'll probably be using a lot. This is the rotate. So if you sort of click and drag it, or, you know, clicking and letting go will kind of actually reposition it, which I don't suggest, or I kind of advise against. But if you just hold the mouse button down as you're kind of rotating, you'll see that it will basically try to snap to, you know, certain degree angles or cardinal directions that can make it vertical and so horizontal, and I can scale it at the same time, right? So this actually is one way of kind of manipulating the scale of the materials that you're applying to. These distorted or shear it, you know, I don't think there's many situations where you really be using that. So just sort of this and the rotate. So like in this case, if I wanted to kind of make this more of a vertical, and just click outside to, you know, finish it, right? And then that's what you can do, right? But you'll see that in some cases you know, especially if you're trying to align a lot of these at the same time, you'll have to do this multiple times, because, you know, I just apply that again and it's not the same one, right? So you'll have to kind of redo that. But this is the sort of workaround around that, and you'll see that if I go back here and go to do the sample paint, for example, this is the original that's there. The sample paint, let's see, if I go to this side, the sample paint will actually take, okay, this is the original horizontal one, right, and this is the vertical one that I just sort of rescaled and repositioned. And you can go to this eyedropper to sample paint and then pick the surface that you redid, right? And then click on all the other surfaces, and it will basically inherit the properties of, you know, the sort of vertical surface that you did earlier. So that's a sort of pretty handy technique to kind of keep around, so you don't have to redo that same operation over and over again. Alright, so that's basically applying materials. For the most part, you probably just want to keep your, ooh, those are some weird ones. You probably just want to keep your materials pretty simple. Don't kind of go too overboard with them. Colors generally are fine. There are some translucent ones that can be sort of fun to play with. The translucent ones always will have this sort of diagonal slash through them, to kind of show you that one is, you know, the transparent, one is the not so transparent version, because, you know, they have different shades. We can try this. And I mean, it'll be kind of weird applying it to surface like this, since these are kind of more solid ones. But you'll, for example, in this case, you kind of see that person behind me, behind the screen in this case. Or if you just use like a normal blue in this, then you'll kind of see, okay, you see the red showing up behind it, etc., etc. Right? Now these you can always edit, right? So if you click on the create material here, it'll basically, these are the defaults. They don't let you, or they're trying to not let you modify the defaults accidentally. But if you have a material selected, let's say I like this gray, but it's not opaque, or it's not translucent enough for my tastes, I can select it and go to create material here, and then you can change the opacity here, right? So you'll see if I want to bring my opacity down to, let's say, 30 here, or if you want to change the color, you can change it here as well, and say, make a new material called gray trans here, say okay, and then this will actually pop up in this sort of version of the in model, which basically says that this is a new texture that you created, and it's solid gray transparent, and it's in the model. And so I can use this and actually apply that. So this is one of the transparent materials. Obviously you want to model these as like, glass panes, or something that's more discrete, in order for it to kind of read correctly. Otherwise you'll get this really weird situation. On the other hand, you can actually save this material that you just made as a material into your SketchUp sort of material libraries. And then you can actually make your own materials if you wanted to. Alright, so that covers basically the application materials, components, and whatnot. Alright, see you guys in the next one.